I heard a therapist describe trauma, and I thought this was really powerful because when I've always thought of trauma, I thought of just this life-altering moment, right? You lost someone in a tragic way or something along those lines. But she describes trauma as capital T and lowercase t trauma, big and little t. Capital T trauma is something like that, something violent that happened in your life, or you were verbally or physically abused, things like that. And then little t trauma, we tend to like poo-poo it and act like it's not really trauma and it's not a big deal, but it's just as devastating to people. Maybe your little t trauma, you didn't have the big T, you weren't, physically abused throughout your childhood, but your little t was that you were ignored. There was no I love you, there was no hug, there wasn't affection in your family. You were only as good as your achievement and you were basically invisible. That's still trauma. If you think of it in a physical sense, a lot of times we think of a gunshot as traumatic, but so is poison a few drops at a time. Is that not just as toxic in every tissue of your body over time? So you need to understand that those things can be serious for you. Either way, whatever you've experienced, sometimes I think people almost feel guilt or shame because I didn't have it as bad as that person. No, but your feelings are valid. Your feelings are feelings. They're not immoral or bad. And how sad that you would feel guilt and shame for feeling depressed or anxious over something that's yet unhealed. We've got to go inside and be willing to do that work. The second piece of that is your mental health. And I'm talking about it in the actual physical sense. This past Sunday after church, I got word that we had lost somebody in a community that I'm part of in a really tragic way. She felt like she had nowhere else to turn, and so she took her own life. And you would have looked at her and thought she's the epitome of success, and she's beautiful, and she's all of these things. But the reality is, I think there were some things that were off and that were unaddressed. And so it made me realize I need to talk more openly and publicly about my journey. And so I posted about it, and I'm going to share with you today. I have been at that point where I was so low that I did not want to be alive. And there was no amount of kind words or praying with somebody or go take a long walk and cheer up that was going to fix it, right? Because it was a chemical imbalance in my brain. And just like if my kidneys were out of whack, I would get medication for it. I got medication because my brain was out of balance. And now I can happily say that, that coupled with therapy and other things, I'm in the best place I've ever been. But I wouldn't have been able to get there if I did not actually address the mental health. Please, I'm begging you, if that's where you are, that's a real injury, that's a real issue, and don't be afraid to go get it taken care of.
So think about that relationship, our relationship to the statement, well, someone else has it worse than I do, right? In a sense, it can be good to have that quick thought in terms of perspective, right? I complained that I had no shoes until I met a man who had no feet, but it's okay to get shoes. Right. You see what I'm saying? It's good to have the perspective, but not to allow the perspective to cause you to stay stuck in your dysfunction,
yeah.
and to not give yourself permission because someone always has it worse.
Yeah.
Cool, get your bearings, but then go work, be like your worth.
Yeah.
Going and bringing it up and getting some freedom and getting some help.
Yeah.
And so, next week we're going to talk about the up, and we're going to talk about relating to God a little bit better. But I want to just spend a little more time inside. I encourage you to be honest about the things that you're thinking, what's going on in your head, and be willing to be introspective, because I think the truth is, if you'll go in there and explore, there's a lot of freedom to be had. I shared a story about last summer. I did a sabbatical. Basically, I took like 4 weeks off, and I was really trying to get some rest and trying to get my head clear. And, you guys know a little bit about the story of our family. We have 3 kids and a daughter and 2 sons, and both of our sons are on the autism spectrum. And just being totally honest about what goes on in my head, I feel when it comes to my daughter, I feel like I'm a really good dad. I feel like I'm probably about as good as it gets, okay, with her. And she she tells me all the time, she's like, Dad, you're amazing. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, say it again. Yeah. She's like, you're my hero. I'm like, for real? She's like, yeah. I'm like, are you sure? She's like, yeah. I'm like how big? And We're just super tight.
I'm the third wheel when they're together. That is
Yeah.
the God's honest truth.
My sons, every way I've tried to bond with them I've had real challenges. And so if I'm just talking pure emotion, I'm naturally connected to her more. My boys, I've struggled with that. And I've even struggled with guilt around my feelings toward them. Because I want to have positive feelings, but sometimes I don't. Around this time last year, I had this thought, I was just, you get in your own head and sometimes you freak yourself out. But I had this thought, and the thought was this: if I knew then what I know now, would I have had them? And I didn't even want to think about that. And yet I brought it up actually over like a fire pit with Shaylin. I was like, I had this thought the other day, and I just got to tell somebody, like, my thought was this: if I knew then what I know now, if it was bullet points, like, hey, this is what your life's going to be like, this and this, and you're going to feel like this every day, and then this and this and this. If I only saw it in bullet points in writing, I don't know. I don't know if I would. I might have stopped at Ella. I might have just said, I don't know that I can do all of that. Like, I don't know that I want to live like that. Now, if I saw them, baby was more. Okay? That's mine now. But I felt tremendous guilt. I'm just being honest with you. I felt tremendous guilt about an honest feeling and an honest thought. So during my sabbatical, I got together with a friend of mine who's a pastor in our city, Taylor Gray. He has a son who's also on the spectrum. And I was like, man, I've only told my wife this. I got to tell you because I think you might get it. I was like, man, I've had this feeling. And I've just been like rolling around in shame that I even care. I'm like, what kind of dad would even ever consider, would even think like, I would undo this. Like, it just felt terrible. And he's like, dude, I felt the same thing. I thought the same thing. He's like, it's okay. Your feelings aren't wrong. They're your feelings. You got to go in, like, you got to face them. You got to go in and do it, and you're going to find some freedom, but you got to go look at it. So I continued to honestly feel bad. And the lie that the enemy was putting in my ear is that I didn't love my sons appropriately. That I didn't love my sons as much as I love my daughter, or that I didn't love them right. Then, of course, you get in that headspace, and the enemy's like, well, see, and that's why this isn't happening better, and that's why that's not, because you as a dad aren't loving them correctly. And then I found a gem that I'm going to share with you. I read a book recently that I hadn't read in 20 years. Read 20 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to pick it up. I couldn't really exactly remember everything that was in it. It was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And in this book, in one section, he talks about love, and he says, people confuse love and affection. They're two different things. He said, affection is what you feel the day before you get married. You feel affection. I mean, he said, you're not supposed to feel affection all your life, because when you feel a lot of affection, you're unproductive. Think back when you first fell in love or whatever, it's intoxicating. Your thoughts are just with this person. You smart people do dumb stuff. You get on the phone to listen to one another breathe. You're not productive. The world would come to a stop if everybody had affection all the time. And he said, in fact, affection sometimes can be an obstacle to love. He says sometimes a parent with huge affection for their kids will spoil that child and harm them over the long haul because of the affection that they feel, even themselves, of how I feel when I'm able to do this. And I want to keep them from all pain, and yet pain and sometimes being without is actually part of your development. So he said affection has its own challenges. And he said, in fact, when affection dries up is when love is actually proven and tested.
Yeah.
People think we fell out of love, but they ran out of affection. They think they fell out of love with their mission or their purpose or their calling. I don't like this anymore, because they ran out of affection. The new car smell wore off. He said it's actually in that moment that the commitment is proven, when I don't feel like it. When I don't have any butterflies anymore, can I stay put? When I'm not feeling it, can I still be responsible? Can I still be respectful? Can I still continue to be faithful? And in that moment, God set me free. Thank you, C.S. Lewis, from the grave gave me a word, because I sat there and all of a sudden the whole thing of me going, I don't love my sons enough, the Lord flipped it inside my head and went, maybe I love them more. Maybe the fact that this is kind of easy over here because it's just dripping in affection. But over here, I lack the affection, I lack the emotion, and yet in that, the love is proven. I'm going to read you a few excerpts of the book because C.S. says it way better than I can. He said, love in a Christian sense does not mean emotion. It's a state not of the feelings, but of the will. The state of the will which we have naturally about ourselves and must learn to have about other people. He said, I point out in the chapter on forgiveness that our love of ourselves does not mean that we like ourselves. It means that we wish our own good. In the same way, Christian love, or charity as he calls it, for our neighbors is quite different thing from liking or affection. We like or are fond of some people and not of others. It is important to understand that this natural liking is neither a sin or a virtue, any more than the likes or dislikes of food are a sin or a virtue. It is just a fact. But of course, what we do about it is either sinful or virtuous. Natural liking or affection for people makes it easier to be charitable toward them. It is therefore normally a duty to encourage our affections, to like people as much as we can, just as often our duty to encourage our liking of exercise and wholesome food. Not because this liking is itself a virtue or charity, but because it is a help to it. The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him even more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. Consequently, though Christian charity seems like a very cold thing to people whose heads are full of sentimentality, and though it is quite distinct from affection, yet it leads to affection. The difference between a Christian and a worldly man is not the worldly man has only affections or likings, and the Christian man has only charity. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them. The Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including the people he could not have ever imagined himself liking at the beginning. Friend, I got to tell you, if you'll go in and work on your note, something feels off, sharp or flat, I can certainly say, here's what they're doing wrong, or I can even look up to God and say, here's what he's missing. But I encourage you to go inward for a moment and to allow the Lord to maybe show you an area where you can work on something. Maybe it's your insecurity. Maybe you go, because I failed, I see myself as a failure. Maybe it's your integrity. And you look and say, I did something I can't undo, and I keep trying to go through and pay for it and keep trying to pay for it, and it's affecting how I see God and other people, and it's wearing me out. Or maybe it's the third, it's an injury, some sort of big T, little t trauma that has affected the way you see God, the way you see other people. And today I want to encourage you to actually go into those thoughts, go into those feelings, go into those realities, and allow the power of God, the presence of God, the Holy Spirit, and the Word of God to come and bring truth and healing in those spots.